Elliott. Well, following that uplifting note about the Colorado budget, I'm Beth McCann, and I am currently the state representative in House District 8. So we meet at the exact same time, so I will probably have to run up there and say hello to those folks as well. But this is an amazing turnout. This is really encouraging to see so many of you out here today. I know it's really going to be important because we have these elections coming up that are critical. And I was thinking the other day, as I'm sure Ken and Michael were, that the caucuses are like 3.5 months away, so it's not a lot of time, and we have the holidays in between. Anyway, thank you for having me here today. I am a candidate for Denver District Attorney. I am excited about this opportunity. There's some really interesting things going on nationally in criminal justice reform, and I believe that Denver should really be at the forefront in this effort, as we are in so many other efforts, as Senator Aguilar mentioned, perhaps in healthcare, certainly in other areas. So I'm excited about leading Denver into this new discussion about criminal justice and what is criminal justice and what are we doing here in our city about it. So let me tell you about kind of the things, the vision that I have for the office, the things I'm interested in doing when I'm elected DA. Number one, I've always been very interested in juvenile justice and juvenile justice reform, improving our system. I think we could do a better job of keeping kids out of that system. And I've done some things in my career that have led toward my interest in this area. When I was in the DA's office, I noticed that many of the DAs didn't like to go into juvenile court because they viewed it as baby court and not that exciting as being in district court and doing felonies. Well, I was really interested in juvenile court because I really believe that it is at that level that we can make a lot of difference. And those kids are still reachable, many of them. I mean, obviously there are dangerous people who need to be in the system, but there are many, I think, who have the ability to become productive citizens. So in my career, after we had the '93 Summer of Violence, I started the Safe City office, which was designed to work with young people, put money in the community to try to keep kids out of gangs and drugs and violence. And we also started the curfew program, which was designed, again, to keep kids in recreation centers so they could so that we could have counselors meet with them and talk with them about how to get out of gangs and drugs. And I actually am very happy to see later that one of the young men that we hired to be a counselor, a young man named Cisco, has stayed in that field, and he is now head of GRASP, which is the Gang Rescue and Support Program. So he was one of our best counselors. He had gotten himself out of a gang, and he is now continuing to help keep other kids out of gangs. So that's a big interest of mine. And I also was able, one of the other things that gives me a great deal of pleasure was I was able to get a bill passed a couple of years ago that had bipartisan support, that was to change the way juveniles are charged as adults. So if they're facing an adult charge, they now have the right to have a court make that decision rather than just an individual DA. And it's important because if a juvenile goes through the adult system, they end up in the adult correctional system, they can end up with a felony, versus the juvenile system, which is designed more for education and rehabilitation. Another thing that I really want to look at is this whole issue of mass incarceration. Many of you may have heard about this. The president's been talking about it. Our country incarcerates more people than any other country in the world, which is pretty amazing, percentage-wise. And we need to look again at, is this the right thing to be doing with our criminal justice system? Are there people that could be handled in a different fashion? Again, there are clearly dangerous people who need to be in prison. When I was in the DA's office, I prosecuted a number of them, but there are also alternatives for lower level crimes, particularly nonviolent drug offenses and that sort of thing. And again, this is a national conversation that we're having, and we actually did pass a bill a few years ago to reduce our mandatory minimum sentences for drug offenses. That's something that I want to continue to work on. I'm also very interested in having the district attorney's office be more active in the community. So one of the things that I plan to do is have the deputies come to these neighborhood meetings, come to their district meetings, democratic meetings, and listen to what are your concerns. What's going on crime-wise in your neighborhood? What are you interested in? So that the DA's office is more transparent, more visible, and is out in the community. I go to a lot of community meetings, as you might imagine, as a state representative, and so I've gotten a lot of valuable input from community members. That's often the basis of many of my bills. Is somebody in the community suggests something that we can then pass as a bill. So I value that community input, and I want to have more transparency. I also am very interested in making sure that we prioritize crimes of predators. So one of the things I've done in the legislature is a big human trafficking bill, which has raised our national ranking from red, which was the worst, to green, which is the best, because we strengthened our criminal laws in human trafficking, and we also set up a statewide council to work on human trafficking issues. And that council actually just is finishing up their first major report, which we will get in January. So human trafficking, domestic violence, sex assault, child abuse, these kinds of, and elder abuse, which we are also seeing a growing amount of as our population ages. These are all things that the DA's office really needs to continue to be vigilant about and make sure that we keep our communities safe from these things. So you might be thinking, oh, why should I vote for her? There are other candidates running, obviously. So let me tell you a little bit about my background and my commitment to criminal justice. So I started in the DA's office. I was there several years. I became a chief deputy, which means I was supervising other lawyers and supervising a courtroom. And in that capacity, I tried all level of felonies and misdemeanors, child abuse, sex assaults, murders. So I have a lot of experience in how the office runs and what it means to prosecute. But I also have a lot of management background. I was the manager of safety for Denver with Wellington Webb, and in that capacity some of you may not know, Denver is a little bit unusual. Most cities don't have this position, but it's the civilian head of the police, fire, and sheriff's departments. So needless to say, it's a busy job, and a lot of things happen in that capacity. So one of the important things, though, is that in a management position, you learn about how to handle personnel issues and things that happen out in the field, if you will. So Chief Mashad, who was the chief of police at the time, had a funny saying. He said, fighting crime is a piece of cake. It's the personnel issues that will bring you to your knees. So anyone who's had personnel experience might understand that. Am I getting to my time?
No, I just wanted to say you have 5.
Okay, 5. All right. So, so I have that kind of background, and I also supervised lawyers over in the Attorney General's office. I worked for both Ken Salazar and John Sutters as head of the civil litigation and employment section of that office. So now I'm in the legislature, and I've been able to address some of those injustices that I saw when I was in the criminal justice system. For example, the juvenile direct file bill that I mentioned, and some of the domestic violence bills that I've done. I also have been pleased to be able to be a prime sponsor on some of the gun safety bills. I feel strongly about having gun safety laws in Colorado that will help make sure people who purchase guns have background checks. And I also was the prime sponsor on a bill to keep guns out of the hands of domestic violence offenders. So I have I've prosecuted, I've supervised lawyers, and now I've made the law. There's really no one else in this race that can say that. And the reason that's important is I think that you learn from all of those experiences, and I can bring all of that to this office. I have lived in Denver for almost 40 years, raised a family here. My 2 kids are now grown. And I have been in public service. A significant part of that time. Although I also practice law privately, so I have experience in the private sector as well. And I would like to be able to provide that experience to you as citizens of Denver, and I would like to help continue to keep our city safe, but also move us forward into a little more, what I would consider a little more progressive view of our criminal justice system. So I'm going to close, because I don't know if I have any time. I have 2 minutes for questions, if anybody has questions, yes.
Hi, again, Brandon Davis, Finance Chair of HD2. You talked a lot about criminal justice on the end of the law coming down on criminals. Now, when we speak about some of the current events that have been happening in terms of criminal justice reform nationally, I'm interested in how the abuses of power from the law are going to be addressed and redressed to citizens, especially citizens of color. Now, the idea and the concept of qualified immunity of police officers, how will you address that when it comes to police officers abusing their power and having qualified immunity when it comes to prosecuting them for their crimes?
Great question. So the question has to do with the abuse of power by law enforcement or sheriff's deputies. So I believe very strongly that all law enforcement officers must be held accountable. And if they break the law, they will be prosecuted. I'm the only candidate in this race that is actually prosecuted, convicted, and sent to prison, a Denver police officer. When I was in the DA's office, I did that. So if they break the law, they will be held accountable. They do not have immunity from breaking the law. So that I believe the DA is elected to make that decision. However, if I felt that I had a conflict of interest to the extent that I could not be objective, I would have no problem asking for a special prosecutor. There's also the option of using the grand jury, because the grand jury has subpoena power. So if you have officers who are reluctant to testify against another officer, the grand jury can subpoena them in to testify. The grand jury has disadvantages because it's in secret, so there's some concerns about that. I'm also interested in looking at options to open up that process a little bit more so that other people might have input into the decision-making process. And then certainly once a decision is made, being transparent about it. I also, and I neglected to mention when I was talking about the community, I would like to have advisory panels that I would be able to work with and that would give me community input about how things should be handled. So, as I said, I've already gotten a number of good ideas from community advisors and would like to continue to do that.
Quick?
Quick.
My
name is Beth Edwards. Thank you for all your years of oversight. Number one, what is your position on the death penalty? And number two, the death penalty in Colorado. If a case came to you, would you prosecute?
So I'm opposed to the death penalty, and I'm on record as voting in the legislature to repeal it. We had that vote a few years ago, and it passed the House, and it did not pass the Senate. So I am on record as opposed to it. I am sworn to uphold the law, and I think the law requires that there be some consultation with victims of crime and that there be consideration of entire circumstances. I can't, but I am opposed to it.
That's your time.
Okay.